Clark Gable was the king of Hollywood, but behind the charm and camera flashes was a secret he never dared to claim. What happens when the most famous man in America fathers a child he won't acknowledge, and the studio helps him hide it? This isn't just scandal. It's one of the most shocking cover-ups in Tinseltown history. Stay with us, because the truth behind Loretta Young and the daughter she was forced to deny will leave you speechless. A golden couple and a golden lie. To the public, Loretta Young and Clark Gable were just two stars sharing the screen in The Call of the Wild. But off-camera, something more dangerous was happening. A spark, a secret, and eventually, a cover-up that would take over 60 years to unravel. In 1935, Hollywood loved an on-screen romance. But what it couldn't handle was an off-screen scandal. Gable was married. Loretta, single and devoutly Catholic, was rising fast. An affair between them wasn't just risky. It was career suicide. And yet, it happened. Their chemistry wasn't just scripted. It was real. And for a brief moment, it overwhelmed everything else. Contracts, reputations, even religion. But the fallout wasn't romantic. It was terrifying. Because Loretta Young didn't walk away from that set with a memory. She walked away with a secret growing inside her. This wasn't just another Hollywood fling. It became one of the most elaborate cover-ups the town would ever stage. Not just to protect the stars, but to preserve the entire image system that kept the Dream Factory running. And that system? It was built to bury the truth. Hollywood's golden mask. In the 1930s, fame wasn't just about talent. It was about control. Studios didn't just own your contract. They owned your life. Everything from your clothes to your love life to your church attendance could be stage managed by PR agents. Morality clauses ruled the fine print. If you strayed too far from the ideal, if you were caught drunk, seen with the wrong person, or God forbid, pregnant out of wedlock, your career could vanish overnight. For someone like Loretta Young, who built her brand on grace, elegance, and Catholic virtue, an unwed pregnancy would have been the end. So when she realized she was pregnant with Clark Gable's child, she didn't just face shame. She faced exile. And Gable? He was the king of Hollywood, charming, masculine, adored. But he wasn't free either. Married to Rhea Langham, a wealthy socialite, a public affair, or worse, a child, could trigger a scandal that even MGM couldn't fix. The solution? Hide everything. And so, the lie began. A dangerous liaison begins. It started on the snowy set of The Call of the Wild, a location shoot meant to capture wilderness on screen, but it ended up igniting something wild off it. Gable and Young were alone for weeks, away from the gossip columns and the studio suits. What happened between them was brief, but intense. Gable was married, yes, but that didn't stop him. Loretta, for all her public modesty, was captivated. "It was a mistake," she would later tell friends, "a moment I couldn't take back." What no one knew at the time was that this moment would change everything. The affair didn't last. Gable returned to his life. Loretta tried to return to hers, but something had already taken root. A few missed periods, a doctor's visit, then the truth. She was pregnant, and in that moment, Loretta knew she had to disappear. The pregnancy no one could know about pregnancy wasn't just private. It was dangerous. Loretta's entire image depended on purity, on perfection, on being the woman mothers wanted their daughters to admire. So the machine kicked in. Her publicist crafted stories about a mysterious illness. Gossip columnists were fed red herrings about exotic vacations and stress-related breakdowns. Studio photographers were instructed not to shoot her from the waist down. Even the timing of her films was restructured, all to accommodate a lie. Fake headlines filled the trades. Loretta Young takes leave for health. Loretta recuperating at seaside retreat. In truth, she was already months along, hiding from cameras, hiding from fans, and hiding from her own reflection. This wasn't just damage control, it was war. And in the next chapter, she would vanish completely, taking her secret with her to a hidden house near the ocean, and preparing for a birth the world would never be allowed to see. Vanishing from view, Loretta Young disappeared from public life in the final months of 1935. She told the world she was going on a health retreat. In reality, she was holed up in a rented house in Venice Beach with her mother, both sworn to secrecy. No press, no calls, no visitors. Even her closest friends didn't know where she was. Behind closed doors, the preparations were intense. The house was soundproofed. A private nurse was brought in. A car waited down the block with a doctor inside, ready to be called at the exact moment labor began. She didn't want painkillers, but they sedated her anyway, partly to dull the physical pain, partly to suppress the fear. On November 6, 1935, she gave birth to a baby girl. She named her Judy after St. Jude, the patron saint of hopeless causes. No father listed, no birth announcement, just a whispered name, a hidden life, and a mother, trying to protect her future. It was a beginning buried in silence. But silence, especially in Hollywood, doesn't last forever. A birth in shadows. The day Loretta Young gave birth, the house fell into total silence. No one spoke above a whisper. The phone stayed off the hook. Neighbors were told they were simply caring for a sick relative. But inside, Loretta was in labor, drugged heavily, dazed, and terrified. The baby girl was born in the early hours of November 6, 1935. Blue-eyed, blonde, and already delicate-looking, she was healthy. But the circumstances were anything but. Loretta's mother held the newborn before Loretta even saw her. A doctor, who had arrived without announcing himself to neighbors, quickly checked the baby and slipped away before dawn. Loretta later admitted she was only half-conscious when her daughter came into the world. It was a memory she never wanted to relive. She named her Judy, said a friend, because she felt like this child didn't stand a chance. St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes. That was the message buried in the name. Judy Lewis. To the outside world, this child didn't exist. No birth certificate was filed publicly. There was no hospital visit. The staff who helped with the birth were paid well, sworn to secrecy. Some kept the secret out of loyalty, others out of fear. But even silence comes with cracks. Loretta had told almost no one, not her friends, not her co-stars. But one woman did know, Pilar Wayne, the wife of John Wayne. Pilar would later confirm that she had visited Loretta during that hidden time. Even she had been kept in the dark about the pregnancy until she saw the baby herself. They said it was a cousin's baby, Pilar once said. But it wasn't. And as the weeks went on, the truth became harder to control, because the real father, the king of Hollywood himself, had already been told. And what he did next became part of the myth that surrounded him for the rest of his life. The telegram, Gable never spoke of. The message was short. Just one line. beautiful, blue-eyed, blonde baby girl born this morning." It was sent directly to Clark Gable. He read it in silence. Then, according to studio lore, he tore it into pieces without saying a word. Gable never acknowledged the telegram, never replied, never made a statement. Not then, not ever. To those who knew him, this silence was both expected and shocking. Gable had a reputation, flirtatious, bold, larger than life, but when confronted with the reality of a child, he vanished from the picture completely. Studio executives, especially at MGM, breathed a sigh of relief. An affair could be buried. A child? That was more complicated. And Gable's silence made it easier. He reportedly made one visit, just one, when the baby was a few months old. He didn't speak to Loretta. He didn't hold the child. He simply looked at her, nodded, and left. He never paid child support, never made a public or private claim of paternity. He returned to his marriage, his fame, and the next chapter of his life, as if Judy had never happened. To Judy Lewis, he was just a face on a movie poster, a name people whispered when they looked at her features, a ghost that never said hello. Meanwhile, Loretta was left to clean up the pieces, and she knew one thing. If the truth ever got out, she wouldn't just lose her career, she'd lose everything. So the story had to go deeper. The lie had to stretch further. And that meant doing the unthinkable, erasing her daughter from her own life. The Phantom Birth Certificate. The cover-up was already elaborate. But to erase a child in 1930s Hollywood, you needed more than secrecy. You needed paperwork. Loretta Young listed the baby's name as Margaret Young on a fake birth certificate. No father listed, no witnesses connected to Hollywood, just a paper trail pointing nowhere. The child's identity was now a fiction, and it worked for a while. But danger came from an unexpected source. The nurse, her name was Frenchie. She had helped during the birth, but as months passed, Frenchie grew resentful. The payoffs weren't enough. The stress was too high. And she had leverage. She knew the entire truth. One night, she made a threat. She would go to the tabloids. She would tell the press everything. Loretta panicked. Her family panicked. And just like that, the plan shifted into desperate territory. Judy was quietly taken from Loretta and placed into a Catholic orphanage under a false identity. The official line? That the child had been rescued from a struggling relative. No connection to Loretta, no hint of Hollywood, just a baby girl abandoned by design. It was cruel, it was cold, and it was the only option that let Loretta keep her name, her career, and her image intact. Over a year later, Loretta returned to the orphanage and staged what would become one of the most surreal performances of her life. She walked in, adopted Judy, brought her home, and told the world she had taken in a needy child. But there was a second baby staged in the act. Loretta pretended to adopt 2 children, then claimed one of them didn't work out and returned her as if the whole thing had been a test. The deception was full-blown now, and no one, not even Judy herself, would be told the truth. Orphaned by design, Judy Lewis spent her early childhood in a world that didn't make sense. She didn't look like her cousins. She didn't share her mother's dark hair. And most of all, she never understood why people stared at her in public and then whispered after they walked away. Her adoption was accepted at face value by the press. After all, Loretta Young had a reputation for goodness. She was a devout Catholic, a role model, a woman who made selfless choices. But at home, The tension was harder to hide. Loretta was loving, yes, but distant. She corrected Judy's smile, her posture, her every move. Some of it was the pressure of being a public figure's daughter, but some of it was deeper. Judy looked too much like someone Loretta was trying to forget. She had Gable's jawline, his eyes, his expressions. Every time Loretta looked at her, the past resurfaced, and the guilt followed. Judy had no idea why. Even Loretta's close friends were carefully coached to keep the lie intact. If Judy ever asked questions, the answer was simple. You're adopted. That's it. No more, no less. But secrets have a shelf life, and Judy wasn't going to stay quiet forever, especially when the signs around her became impossible to ignore. Life after the lie. While Judy was growing up in the shadows of a secret, Loretta Young stepped back into the spotlight like nothing had ever happened. She smiled for the cameras. She walked red carpets, accepted awards, and signed studio deals. Her image was flawless. She was the very portrait of Hollywood elegance. Poised, polished, untouchable. No one suspected that just months earlier, she had been in hiding, terrified and alone, giving birth to a child she couldn't publicly claim. No one knew about the feverish planning, the forged documents, the orphanage, and Loretta intended to keep it that way. She returned to work with terrifying discipline. She wrapped her chest to suppress the milk. She applied layers of makeup over the exhaustion, the grief, the guilt. She stood under hot lights and hit her marks while carrying the weight of the greatest performance of her life, pretending none of it had happened. The cameras never saw her crack. But just across the studio lot, Clark Gable was back at work too. They passed each other occasionally in the hallways, their names sometimes listed on the same call sheets. But there were no words exchanged, no glance held, no acknowledgement. It was as if it never happened, one crew member later recalled. But the silence between them, you could feel it. It wasn't cold. It was frozen. To the world, they were just two stars working in the same orbit. Behind closed doors, they were two people pretending the most defining moment of their lives didn't exist. And in the middle of it all was Judy, a child being raised by the woman who gave birth to her, yet was told she had been adopted. She was bright, kind, and curious. But there was always a quiet tension at home. Judy never quite understood why her mother was loving but distant. Why there were questions that got only vague answers. Why her mother sometimes stared at her a little too long, or looked away too quickly. Loretta tried to be the mother she wanted to be, but Judy looked too much like her father. The same chin, the same jawline, the same eyes. And every time Loretta saw it, it pulled her back to the memory she had tried so hard to bury. Judy didn't know it yet, but she was growing up surrounded by echoes, of silence, of secrecy, of a truth that refused to stay hidden. And Hollywood? Hollywood kept its secrets well. The press never caught on. The studios never spoke out. And the public, dazzled by Loretta's beauty and grace, never thought to look beneath the surface. But time is its own kind of truth-teller. Because children grow up, and questions don't. Stay buried forever. And one day, Judy Lewis, the girl with Clark Gable's face, would look in the mirror, look at her mother, and finally ask the question no one was prepared to answer. The question that would unravel the greatest lie ever told. The moralizing Madonna. As the years passed, Loretta Young doubled down on her public image. She wasn't just a movie star now, she was the ideal. Chaste, refined, deeply Catholic. She spoke at churches, supported charities, and promoted moral behavior in Hollywood. Magazines praised her modesty. Parents pointed to her as the woman young girls should look up to. But behind the angelic glow was a woman living with a secret she could barely stand to face. Every Sunday at Mass, every interview she gave about God and virtue, the memory sat there, unspoken, heavy. She had abandoned her daughter, reclaimed her under false pretenses, and forced her to live under a lie, all while standing in front of cameras and preaching morality. It wasn't cruelty, it was guilt. Loretta had convinced herself that hiding the truth had protected Judy, that by sacrificing honesty, she had saved both of them from public ruin. But guilt doesn't just vanish. It festers. It changes how you speak, how you smile, how you love. She carried it like a weight in her bones, a friend later said. She couldn't undo the past, but she couldn't admit it either. The contradiction between her public virtue and private shame made her both magnetic and mysterious. And as Judy grew older, more questions surfaced. Why did her mother always change the subject when the past came up? Why did her own face feel strangely familiar when watching Clark Gable films? She didn't have answers, but she could feel the truth circling. And then came a day when Loretta and Gable, after all those years, would face each other again on a set. And the past, whether they spoke of it or not, came rushing back. The reunion on set. It was 1949, 14 years after The Call of the Wild, and more than a decade since Loretta had given birth to Clark Gable's daughter in silence. The studio, hungry for headlines, cast them together in Key to the City, a light romantic comedy, a reunion of two beloved stars. But to them, it wasn't light, it wasn't romantic, it was a collision course. On set, they were polite, professional. But beneath the surface, the tension was unbearable. They avoided eye contact when they could, kept small talk short, smiled for photographers, and then drifted in opposite directions. Loretta was carrying a weight that no one on set could see. Midway through production, she collapsed. Some whispered exhaustion, others suspected more. Rumors spread that Loretta was pregnant again by Gable. The tabloids never got the proof, and the studio buried the story. But the miscarriage was real. She recovered quietly, finished the film, walked the red carpet with Gable beside her, his hand resting lightly on her back, their smiles frozen like porcelain. It was one of the last times they were ever seen in public together. For Loretta, the film was a full-circle moment. One more reminder that no matter how far she'd come, the lie she built her life around was never really gone. But while she stayed silent, Judy's voice was beginning to stir. Judy's awakening. By the time Judy Lewis reached her 20s, the pieces weren't adding up. She knew she was adopted. That story had been told from the beginning. But she didn't feel adopted. Her family treated her like she belonged. Her mother treated her like something else. Loving, but distant. Warm, but careful. And there was always that unspoken tension. Then there was the mirror. Judy didn't look like Loretta, but she did look like someone else. Someone famous. Someone strangers occasionally mentioned when they met her, often with nervous laughter. "You look just like Clark Gable," one guest at a party told her. She laughed it off, but it stayed in her head. She started asking questions. Her mother avoided them. The family gave vague, uncomfortable answers, but the feeling was there, buzzing under the surface. Until one night, her fiancé said it plainly, "Your father is Clark Gable." Judy was stunned, sickened. It made sense, and it broke her. When she confronted Loretta, the response was panic. Tears, shaking hands, but no denial. She didn't want to talk about it, Judy later wrote. She just said she had made a terrible mistake. And then she got up and left the room. That silence said everything. Judy didn't go to the press, not yet. But she knew the truth now. And it lived in her face, her voice, and her very existence. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to lead to the book that would change everything. A truth delayed, a daughter denied. In 1994, Judy Lewis published Uncommon Knowledge, her memoir, and her revelation. In it, she told the story that Loretta Young had spent a lifetime hiding. The affair, the pregnancy, the adoption cover-up, the unacknowledged daughter of Clark Gable. Hollywood held its breath. Some insiders already knew. Others claimed shock. But most were stunned by the raw honesty in Judy's words. She didn't attack Loretta. She didn't blame Gable. She just told the truth. Her truth. For the first time. The book wasn't tabloid bait. It was a daughter's plea for recognition. Loretta, now elderly and reclusive, didn't give interviews. But privately, something shifted. She began dictating a memoir of her own, one that wouldn't be published until after her death. In it, she admitted the affair, admitted the birth, admitted the lie. She stopped short of naming Gable directly, but the implication was clear. And for Judy, that was enough. Gable, long dead by then, had never once spoken of her, never written, never left a note. His silence remained permanent. But the world now knew what Judy had always felt in her bones. The man on the screen was the man in her DNA. It wasn't revenge, it was relief. And it closed the chapter on one of the most carefully constructed lies in Hollywood history. The greatest lie ever told. So why was Clark Gable part of Hollywood's biggest cover-up? Because silence was safer than scandal. Because the studio system was built on image, not truth. Because one slip could destroy careers, and the only thing more valuable than talent in 1930s Hollywood was the illusion of virtue. Gable didn't deny Judy because he hated her. He denied her because he couldn't acknowledge her. His career, his marriage, his legacy, all of it hung in the balance. And Loretta? She wasn't heartless. She was terrified. She believed she had no choice, that if she admitted the truth, she'd lose everything. So they both stayed silent. For decades. Judy Lewis lived most of her life as a secret, a rumor, a whispered truth buried beneath studio lights and magazine covers. But in the end, she claimed her name, her face, her place in the story. Loretta Young died in 2000. Her posthumous memoir confirmed what Judy had already exposed. A final, fragile nod to the child she once hid in shame. And Gable? He remains one of Hollywood's greats. But now the myth includes the mistake. Because in the end, the truth always wins. Even in a town built on fiction. A hidden pregnancy. A silenced daughter. And decades of denial. Clark Gable's biggest role may have been the one he never spoke about. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more forgotten Hollywood truths worth remembering.